Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman and part 3 of our 3-part series on The Seventh Seal. So far, we've talked about a lot of the symbols, the characters, and a lot of the real specifics of the Seventh Seal. But I think we want to really broaden this out and talk about the movie's legend.
I think one of the strengths of the film is that it's impactful both in the past, and we know this just from some of the reviews and the history of the film that we've looked into, as well as today it remains impactful. And so I think when we talk about it, we definitely need to look at those two different audiences.
Bergman uses this as more than just a film. It's bigger than that.
I agree. I think one of the things that's interesting for me is in its time when it was first released, he did something very different because historically cinema was a medium for entertainment. You know, it's supposed to be lighthearted, enjoyable. You're not really supposed to walk into a movie theater and get your, popcorn and drink and be confronted with
big questions. That's what it really is, I think. Is that
the
this
meaning
film,
of life.
Yeah, it asks the big questions.
And so what's interesting here is that he's really stretching the medium of film, and he's, talking about subjects that are theological, philosophical, existential, and really doing it all through storytelling, which is fascinating.
This film also really opened up what became known as the art house cinema in the United States in particular. And I think that was the place for this kind of movie to operate, because these weren't just audience members who were looking to get that entertainment, as you mentioned, but they were, ready for those challenges of those big questions. And I think that their Seventh Seal really laid the ground for a lot of films that came after it. In one case, Bergman's films that came after it, The Wild Strawberries is another smashing success for him, and will be the next one that we're talking about, but also his entire career. But it also opened up the doors for a lot of other foreign films to come into the United States.
Not just the United States, though, maybe North American audiences, basically giving people an alternative, if you will, to just Hollywood cinema.
Yeah, I think maybe what I should have said there was that it is Hollywood cinema that it kind of changed. It made, the people in Hollywood sort of look to other countries for the kind of influential film that could also attract enough people to make box office dollars.
While there's no doubt that in its time the movie was definitely a prime film, what's interesting is that it has definitely retained that cachet. And I'm wondering, do you feel that today it still has the same amount of power and influence?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. And I think one thing to point out is that it carries a lot more weight today than it did at the time. And what I mean by that is film critics have, praised it endlessly since it came out, so that adds a lot of weight to it. Also, film students have been forced to watch it in their classes. Forced. And they also have been forced to analyze it ad infinitum. And is that a bad thing? I mean, I guess the question is, do classic books become less meaningful to people if they've been overanalyzed in high schools and universities? That's up for debate. With this film, is it still influential today? Yes and no. In one way, we really see it in pop culture, and I think a lot of people have learned about the Seventh Seal from the pop culture references. But also, I don't think that it carries the same weight in the way that Bergman intended. And what I mean by that is the religious symbolism and meaning that is just woven throughout the film doesn't really stick, in my opinion, with a lot of audiences today, because in some ways the way that religion is presented in the film, the questions it raises, don't really speak to certain people like they might have at the time.
So you feel that there's really been an erosion of kind of the biblical messaging of the film due to kind of contemporary audiences just not connecting with that anymore?
Well, here's a good example. When we watch the movie, you have a little bit more, quite a bit more religious background than I do. You were raised with it more.
Not that I'm a religious fanatic.
No, we'll clear that up. But you've read the Bible, and I haven't, very little of it. And Bergman, he is the son of a minister, and I think he carried a lot of that burden, if we want to call it that, into his adult
Good
life.
old Catholic guilt.
Yes, exactly. But it really was laid out in his films, and I don't think that society as a whole, in a generalization, has been born and grown up with that religious background instilled in all of them. We're just a more diverse culture now. But between us, I mean, I think we're good examples of how this film speaks in different ways to viewers.
For sure. For me, as a kid, I was raised going to church, so I knew the Bible in that context. As a literature student, I studied the Bible from a literary perspective. As a history student, I studied it as a historical text. So I'm very, very familiar with it. But I also can relate to a lot of the struggles that he has as a man that he's trying to explore through the film. Because I think any individual I shouldn't say any, but many people who are raised with a certain faith of any kind, not just Christianity, will struggle with that at times while living as human beings.
I think even if you put the religious angle aside, the struggle of life and death and how to deal with death once you reach it is something that resonates. And yes, that's a part of the film that can speak to modern audiences. But are these messages that Bergman is debating in the film really connecting with the audience in the way that he intended? I think in many cases, no. But does that make it a lesser film? No, I don't think so.
I don't think so as well. If anything, it has entered into a completely other realm of meaning. And that's what's unique about works of art like this, is that they surpass the artist that has made them.
So basically, The Seventh Seal is bigger than Bergman.
In a way, yes. I think what's happened is that the film has really come into its own and established its own legend. It's independent of the artist. And, we've talked about the question of the artist before, the authority of the artist, the space of the artist, the connection between him and the work. Like, where does the inspiration for the film come from? And that's a common debate. Like, is the artist kind of a conduit for things that are bigger than himself? Is he an instrument of God, for example? Is he kind of a conduit for social consciousness, and he's reflecting things that are in his or her subconscious that are then coming out, kind of a more social context for things? It's interesting because it's hard to believe that one man has this kind of grand genius that will survive all time, so to speak.
So The Seventh Seal then is bigger than Bergman.
I would think so.
Now, is it essential Bergman?
Really,
yeah,
David? Without doubt it is.
Yes, I think so. If only for the legend that exists around it. And the fact that film students have to watch it, so why not you?
Want to watch it.
Yeah, no, it's a good movie. I still have to say I was a little bit let down by it, just slightly. It's hard to live up to that great legend.
It is hard. I think the first, and we've seen it multiple times, but the first time we watched it, we were definitely a little perplexed.
Yeah. But I think that's a good thing. It's good to have that real challenge of this film.
Yeah.
Makes for a good 3-part discussion.
And it grows on you. Death grows on you. It really does.
So that brings us to the end of this episode of Breaking Down Bergman. So be sure to like us on Facebook.
And leave us your comments.
We'd love to know what you think of this movie and our lengthy discussion. And join us next time where we're going to look at Wild Strawberries, another film that helped create the Bergman legend. So we'll see you next time on Breaking Down Bergman.